The chill of the autumn wind bit through Eleanor's thin cloak as she stood in the heart of Ashbourne's market square. Around her, merchants shouted, coins clinked, and the smell of roasted chestnuts and horse manure mingled in the damp air. She clutched her hands together, trembling, not from the cold but from the dread that coiled in her chest. Her mother's grip on her arm tightened, nails digging through fabric. "Hold your head high," Lady Margaret hissed. "At least try to appear worth something." Eleanor's lips parted in disbelief. "Mother, please, you can't mean—" "I can, and I do. You've shamed me long enough." Lady Margaret's voice was low, sharp as steel. "No man wants a barren wife, yet perhaps someone will pay for a servant. Better coin than disgrace." Eleanor's breath caught. Her eyes darted to the crowd, to faces that looked away, pretending not to see. She was 19, once promised to a lord's son, until whispers spread that she would never bear children. Those whispers became verdicts, and verdicts became truth in a land where destiny was believed to speak louder than reason. At the center of the square, a tall man in a dark cloak waited beside two horses. His presence commanded attention, though he spoke not a word. The sigil stitched on his shoulder, a silver wolf beneath a crown, was unmistakable. The mark of the Alpha King. Lady Margaret approached him, feigning grace. "My lord, as promised, the girl is strong, obedient. She can serve at your court." Eleanor's stomach turned. "Mother, you can't—" "Hush, child." Margaret's hand struck her cheek, not hard enough to wound, but enough to silence. "You will obey." The man in the cloak raised an eyebrow, studying Eleanor with eyes the color of storm clouds. "What is her crime?" "None," Margaret replied quickly, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "She is barren. Useless for marriage, but perhaps of service elsewhere." The man's gaze lingered on Eleanor longer than comfort allowed. Then, without a word, he drew a small leather pouch from his belt and tossed it toward Margaret. The weight of silver clinked in her palm. Eleanor felt her soul fracture as the coins changed hands. "I am not a thing to be sold," she whispered, voice breaking. The emissary turned toward her, expression unreadable. "No thing can be sold," he said quietly. "Only those who have been forsaken can be bought." Those words cut deeper than her mother's betrayal. When the man gestured toward the waiting horses, Eleanor hesitated, her feet rooted to the cobblestones. She looked once more at her mother. The woman who had once braided her hair sung to her when storms frightened her. Margaret met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment there was something there, regret, or perhaps shame. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Go," her mother said flatly. "Do not return." Eleanor climbed onto the horse. The emissary mounted his own and guided them north, away from Ashbourne's market, away from the only home she had ever known. The sound of hooves against frozen earth echoed like a heartbeat fading into silence. Hours later, when the town's smoke disappeared behind the hills, she finally spoke. "Where are you taking me?" "To Thornhall Castle," the man replied. "To the Alpha King." Her pulse quickened. Why would a king want a barren girl? His eyes met hers, almost amused. Perhaps he does not seek what others seek. The king reads destiny, not flesh. Eleanor frowned. "Destiny? In what?" "In the eyes," he said simply, "and yours, my lady, do not speak of barrenness. They speak of something else." She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the last glow of sunset bled into the forest's dark edge. The wind carried a scent of pine and snow, sharp and cleansing, but it did little to ease the ache inside her. Somewhere deep within, beneath her fear and humiliation, a small spark refused to die. If her destiny could still be read, perhaps it was not yet written in shame. If you believe every destiny hides a spark of light, subscribe for more stories like this, and let Eleanor's journey remind you that even in betrayal, the seed of renewal can take root. The road to Thornhall wound through forests ancient as the kingdom itself. The bare branches whispered above Eleanor like skeletal hands, brushing secrets through the wind. By the time the spires of the castle came into view, dusk had deepened into a cold indigo. Smoke rose from the chimneys, curling against a moon veiled in cloud. The emissary, whose name she had learned was Garrick, rode beside her in silence. His demeanor was curt, disciplined, the kind of man used to commands rather than comfort. When they crossed the drawbridge, Eleanor's stomach twisted. Thornhall was vast, stone walls blackened by centuries of storms, towers lit by torches flickering in the wind. It felt less like a home than a fortress that tolerated no weakness. "Dismount," Garrick said, dismounting first. Servants in wool and furs approached, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. A tall steward met them at the gate. "Garrick," the man greeted coldly, "the king is in council. He'll see you at dawn." Garrick nodded, then turned to Eleanor. "You'll be housed in the lower east wing. Do not wander." Eleanor wanted to ask why she was there, what the king intended, but Garrick's expression made her hold her tongue. As she followed a maid through stone corridors, her footsteps echoed softly against the floors. The castle smelled of pine resin, wax, and something darker, like secrets buried too deep to name. Her chamber was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a single candle flickering beside the window. She sat, staring out at the courtyard below, where men trained with swords even in the dying light. Their roars carried upward, reminders of a world ruled by strength. When dawn came, a horn's call woke her. The maid returned with a basin of water and a dress finer than she'd ever worn. "The king requests your presence," she said, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. Eleanor's hands trembled as she dressed. Her mind raced with questions. Why had the king sent for her? What did he see in her that her mother could not? In the great hall, fire blazed in twin hearths. Nobles stood in clusters, murmuring among themselves. At the far end, on a throne of carved oak and wolf pelts, sat King Aldrich Thorne, the Alpha King. He was taller than she expected, his frame marked by the kind of power that came from battle rather than birth. His dark hair brushed his collar, and his eyes, silver-grey like winter frost, met hers with unsettling precision. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. "Eleanor of Ashbourne," he said, his voice steady yet carrying the weight of command. "You were brought here under my order." She lowered her head. "Your Majesty, I was told nothing of your reason." "That will be remedied soon." His gaze didn't waver. "You are aware of the rumors surrounding your name?" Her throat tightened. "That I am barren," she said quietly. The nobles exchanged whispers, some smirking. Aldrich lifted a hand, silencing them. "And yet I have found the value of a person seldom lies in what others say of them." Confusion flickered through her. "Then why bring me here, my king?" His expression softened barely. "Because when I looked upon you in the market, I saw not emptiness but something rare. Your eyes spoke of strength that endures shame. I wish to understand it." "I do not understand myself," she admitted. "Then we shall learn together," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me, when the world cast you aside, what did you see in the mirror?" Eleanor hesitated. A woman who was nothing, and yet still breathing. A faint smile curved his lips. "Then you are already something more than most." The chamber grew silent. Even the fire seemed to bow to the weight of his words. When he dismissed her, Garrick guided her out. But as she crossed the threshold, Eleanor glanced back. Aldrich's eyes followed her, not with desire but with curiosity, as though he were reading a page that refused to end. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, relentless, and strangely beautiful. And though she did not yet know it, the king who ruled through fear had just met the woman who would one day rule his heart. The next morning dawned pale and heavy with mist. Bells tolled faintly from Thornhall's northern tower, summoning the court to witness a ceremony Eleanor did not yet understand. The air inside the castle was thick with anticipation, with servants rushing through corridors carrying silver basins and candles. When Garrick arrived at her door, he carried a cloak of white wool lined with fur. "The king has summoned you," he said, his tone unreadable. Eleanor's pulse quickened. For what purpose? He met her gaze for only a moment. "You'll know soon enough. Speak truthfully, whatever happens." They walked through long stone halls until they reached the Hall of Iron Flames, a vast chamber where iron braziers burned with blue fire. The nobles stood in silence, their breath clouding faintly in the chill. At the far end, King Aldric awaited, clad in black and silver, a wolf-shaped ring glinting on his hand. Eleanor bowed her head. "Your Majesty." "Eleanor of Ashbourne," he began, his voice carrying easily across the hall, "you have heard of the old ways of Ravengard, have you not?" "I have heard whispers," she said carefully, "of seers who read destiny through one's reflection." "Whispers are often fragments of truth," Aldric replied. "Long before ink and parchment, our ancestors believed the eyes held one's fate, unaltered, unhidden. I intend to see yours." A murmur swept through the court. Eleanor felt the weight of every gaze on her. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I am not of royal blood. Why—" "Because destiny cares little for lineage," he interrupted. "You have nothing to fear unless you hide falsehood." She drew in a steadying breath. "I have none left to hide." Aldric gestured for her to step forward. The hall seemed to grow quieter still, even the fires dimming as though waiting. When she lifted her head, he met her eyes fully for the first time, unshielded, unhurried. His gaze was piercing but not cruel. It was as if he were looking through her, past her fears to something buried deeper. Minutes passed in silence. The onlookers shifted uneasily. Then Aldric exhaled, almost as if awakening from a vision. "The tree that blooms in winter," he said softly, as if naming something sacred. Eleanor blinked. "What do you mean?" He straightened. "It is a sign of renewal. Of life born where all believe it cannot grow." Laughter rippled from one of the nobles. Lady Isolde, a woman with jewels like frost in her hair, smirked. "How fitting. The barren girl bears the sign of life." Aldric's gaze cut toward her, silencing her instantly. "Do not mock what you do not understand." Eleanor's hands trembled. "Surely there is some mistake." "My life holds no such promise." "The eyes do not lie," Aldric said, his voice low but firm. "They reveal what words conceal." Her throat tightened. She had been told all her life that her worth was measured by what she could not give, by a womb labeled empty, by a promise broken. And yet, this man, this king, looked at her as though she was something more than a vessel of shame. Still the weight of disbelief pressed against her. "If my eyes tell truth, why do they not tell it to me?" He studied her quietly. "Perhaps you have never been allowed to listen." Aldric turned to his council. "Let it be known that this woman stands under my protection. Any who question her place here question me." Gasps rippled through the hall. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled under the shock. She wanted to protest, to demand why he would risk his name for hers, but his expression allowed no argument. "Return her to her chambers," he said to Garrick, though his gaze lingered on her a heartbeat longer. "Her destiny has spoken." As she was led away, her thoughts swirled like the snow gathering outside. Renewal, life, words she had never dared to claim as her own. That night, when she closed her eyes, she still saw his, silver, unwavering, reflecting something she couldn't yet name. Days passed beneath the grey sky of Thornhall, and the murmurs in the corridors grew louder with each one. The king's strange favour toward the girl from Ashbourne had unsettled the court. Some whispered she was a seer, others said she had bewitched him. Yet to Eleanor, the only truth was confusion. Her new life began quietly. Aldric's decree had appointed her as royal archivist, keeper of letters, decrees and histories once forgotten. The post was honourable, though many saw it as unearned. Still, Eleanor accepted without protest. In the long chamber lined with shelves of parchment, she found something she had never known: peace through work. The smell of ink and dust wrapped around her like a balm. Her hands, once trembling with fear, now traced forgotten records with delicate precision. There was order here, a logic untouched by cruelty. Lady Rowan, the royal healer, visited her often. "You keep yourself hidden," Rowan said one morning, leaning on her staff. Her grey hair fell loosely over her shoulders. "The king's court is not kind to mystery. Best let them see your worth before they invent it." Eleanor looked up from her writing. "I have little worth to show." "Nonsense." Rowan smiled softly. "Aldric does not give trust easily. If he's chosen you for this task, there's reason." Eleanor hesitated. "I think he misreads me. I am no symbol of renewal. Rowan's eyes glimmered. Perhaps not yet. Later that day, as snow drifted through the window slits, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Aldrich himself. The servants bowed, and Eleanor rose quickly, heart pounding. "Do not stop your work," he said, his tone measured. "I wished only to see how the archives fare under new care." She lowered her gaze. "They are orderly, Your Majesty." "I can see that." He walked slowly between the shelves, fingers brushing the spines of old ledgers. "Tell me, Eleanor, what have you learned from these walls?" "That the kingdom remembers much," she answered quietly, "but understands little. Records preserve truth, but men still choose which truths to believe." A faint smile touched his lips. "You speak as if you've lived longer than your years." "I have lived enough to learn that silence can teach more than words." For a moment, his gaze softened. Then he turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Do not let their whispers wound you. The wolves will test what they do not comprehend." When he was gone, Eleanor's pulse refused to calm. His voice lingered like warmth after frost. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Gratitude for kindness where she had known none, but others saw what she could not. Sir Cedric, one of the king's knights, often crossed her path in the corridor. He greeted her with quiet respect, but one evening, as they met near the library steps, he spoke more boldly. "You should be careful," he said. "Affection from a throne is a dangerous gift." Eleanor blinked. "Affection? You think the court doesn't see it? The king looks at you differently. That alone can make enemies." "I serve him as I would any lord," she replied, though her voice lacked certainty. Cedric studied her a moment longer. "Then serve wisely. In Thornhall, loyalty is tested by envy." That night Eleanor lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the stone walls. She thought of Aldrich's eyes, steady, unreadable. Was there truly affection in them? Or only curiosity, as he'd claimed? The line between the two blurred with every passing day, yet beneath her confusion something within her shifted. For the first time she worked not from fear, but purpose. If destiny could be read in eyes, perhaps hers had begun to rewrite itself, word by word, page by page. Winter deepened around Thornhall, each day shorter than the last. Snow clung to the battlements like memory refusing to fade, and inside, the corridors glowed with the amber light of torches. Eleanor's work in the archives had become her refuge, her days filled with quiet rhythm, until the past returned, cloaked in velvet and deceit. It began with murmurs. Servants whispered of a noblewoman's arrival at court, a widow dressed in mourning silks. When Eleanor heard the name spoken in passing, Lady Margaret of Ashbourne, her blood turned to ice. She dropped the parchment she had been holding, her breath shallow. Her mother was here. By the time she gathered the courage to ask why, the answer came from Garrick himself. "She seeks audience with the king," he said, his tone unreadable. "Claims she carries a petition for your family's lands." Eleanor's heart sank. She has no lands left. "My father's estate was sold years ago." Then perhaps she seeks something else. That evening, as she crossed the great hall, Eleanor saw her, Lady Margaret, standing near the fire among nobles. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was bound in an elegant braid, her gown rich and immaculate. She turned, eyes meeting Eleanor's, and for a heartbeat, time folded. The mother who had sold her for silver now curtsied as though nothing had ever been broken. "Eleanor," Margaret said softly, her smile rehearsed. "My dear child, how strange it feels to find you in a king's hall." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Strange indeed, my lady." Margaret tilted her head. "I came to make amends." Eleanor stared at her, disbelief hollowing her chest. "Our amends cannot be bought, mother." "Then perhaps they can be earned," Margaret replied smoothly. "A mother's actions, though harsh, are not always without reason. You were destined for more than a quiet death in Ashbourne. Look where you stand now." Her words stung like frostbite. "Do not pretend you foresaw this." Before Margaret could answer, a voice cut through the hall. "Lady Margaret." Aldrich's tone was calm but commanding. He descended the dais, his eyes shifting briefly toward Eleanor before resting on her mother. "You sought an audience." Yes, your majesty, Margaret said, bowing low. I come to plead for restoration of my family's name. My daughter was taken under unfortunate circumstances. I wish only to serve your realm again as my husband once did. Aldrich's gaze hardened. Your daughter was not taken. She was sold. Gasps rippled through the hall. Margaret's face paled, but she quickly masked it with feigned dignity. A misunderstanding, my lord. Enough. His voice echoed like thunder. You will not twist truth in my court. He turned to Eleanor. Is this woman truly your mother? Eleanor's lips parted. For a moment she wanted to deny it, to free herself from the weight of blood, but she nodded. She is. Aldrich's eyes softened, just barely. Then let it be known that no shame falls upon the daughter for the sins of the parent. Lady Margaret may remain in Thornhall until sunrise. After that she will return to Ashbourne. No gold, no title, no favour. Margaret's composure cracked. Your Majesty, I beg— Begging will not undo cruelty, he said quietly. Leave while you still can. As guards escorted her away, Eleanor stood frozen, her heart torn between pity and relief. The whispers that followed felt distant, muffled by the storm of her thoughts. Later, in the solitude of the archive, she pressed her hands to her face and wept, not for her mother's banishment, but for the child she had once been, still longing for tenderness that would never come. When she finally looked up, Aldrich stood at the doorway. I had no right to speak for you, he said gently, but I could not let her wound you again. Eleanor wiped her tears, voice trembling. You defended me when I could not defend myself. I don't know how to thank you. Do not thank me, he murmured. Just live differently than those who wronged you. And for the first time in her life, she believed she might. Thornhall awoke in restless splendor. By decree of the council, a banquet would be held in honor of the season's end, a display of loyalty and unity after weeks of tension. Yet behind the laughter and polished silver, Eleanor sensed the venom curling beneath every smile. She stood at the edge of the grand hall, dressed in muted blue, her hair braided simply. The nobles glittered in jewels and silks, their words sweet, but their glances sharp. Ever since the king had defended her before the court, her name lingered on every tongue, heavy with speculation. Lady Rowan brushed her shoulder lightly as she passed. Keep your chin high, child. Wolves circle those who appear wounded. I have no wish to provoke them, Eleanor murmured. They're already provoked, Rowan replied with a knowing smile. So, let them choke on their own curiosity. At the dais, King Aldrich spoke with his councillors, his expression calm but distant. The firelight carved his profile in gold, and when his gaze met Eleanor's across the hall, the air seemed to pause. It lasted only a heartbeat, but that was long enough for every watching noble to see. Lady Isolde, radiant in crimson silk, leaned toward a cluster of courtiers. Her laughter rang out like glass breaking. Our king grows sentimental, she whispered loudly enough to be heard. Her scholar's daughter, perhaps, but hardly fit for a throne's attention. Eleanor's hands tightened around her goblet. She told herself to ignore it. But when Isolde rose and crossed the hall with deliberate grace, a strange calm settled over her. My Lady of Ashbourne, Isolde said sweetly, curtsying, you must allow me to thank you. It takes rare courage to stand so near to power, and rarer still to keep from trembling. Eleanor smiled faintly. Courage is often mistaken for necessity. The noblewoman's eyes gleamed. Then you must live a very necessary life indeed. She gestured toward the table of fruits and pastries. Come, taste what the king's generosity provides. Servants moved aside as they approached the spread. Isolde selected a ripe plum and pressed it into Eleanor's hand. A gift, she said. May it be sweeter than your stay. Eleanor hesitated. The fruit glistened like a jewel, but something in Isolde's tone prickled her senses. Around them, whispers grew. Aldrich's voice broke through the noise. Lady Isolde, he called, sharp as the edge of a blade. Have you taken to testing my guest's loyalty with poison now? The hall fell silent. Isolde froze, colour draining from her face. Your Majesty, I would never— Then eat first, he said, stepping forward. Every eye turned to her trembling hands. Slowly, she brought the plum to her lips. She bit and swallowed. Moments passed. Her relief was visible. The king's expression didn't soften. "Be careful where you direct your games, my lady. Some of us have grown tired of them." Laughter rippled quietly among the lower tables, cautious but undeniable. Isolde curtsied stiffly and retreated, her pride burning brighter than her dress. When the noise returned, Eleanor stood motionless. Aldrich approached her, his voice low. "I should not have humoured her. I did not wish to draw attention," she said, eyes downcast. "You draw it without trying," he murmured. Her breath caught. "Then, I am a burden to your peace." His gaze softened. "No. You are a reminder that peace still needs defending." Before she could respond, trumpets sounded from the upper gallery, signaling the next toast. Aldrich returned to his place, leaving her with words that lingered longer than wine. That night, as the feast dwindled and laughter echoed in fading circles, Eleanor realized she had done more than survive the court's malice. She had endured it with grace that even her enemies could not undo, and though she did not yet know it, Thornhall itself had begun to shift, one quiet heartbeat at a time. The first snow of the season fell thick and silent across the northern woods, coating the land in white serenity. Yet beneath the stillness, anticipation pulsed through Thornhall. The winter hunt, a royal tradition older than the castle itself, had come. It was said that only those with clear hearts and unshaken courage returned from the forest unscathed. Eleanor had not intended to ride with them. Her duties belonged to parchment and ink, not to hounds and horns. But when Aldrich appeared at the archive door that morning, cloaked in fur and frost, she found no words to refuse. "You will come," he said simply. "It is time you saw the heart of Ravengard beyond its walls." Her breath misted in the cold air. "I am no hunter, my king." "Nor am I today," he replied. "This is not about the kill." And so she rode beside him through the forest gates, surrounded by knights and banners. The sun hung pale in a sky the color of pewter, snowflakes drifted like ash, and the world felt suspended between silence and storm. Sir Cedric rode a few paces behind them, his voice low. "Strange company for a scholar," he teased, though not unkindly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Perhaps the king grows weary of scholars who fear the cold." Cedric chuckled. "Or perhaps he seeks wisdom where his counsel lacks it." Aldrich glanced back, his expression unreadable, but a trace of humor flickered in his eyes. "Enough jesting. The wolves will hear your chatter before we do." They rode deeper into the pines. The air thickened with the scent of moss and ice. Hounds barked in the distance, echoing against the valley. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the reins, her pulse quickening with every sound. Hours passed before they reached the frozen stream that marked the hunt's heart. Garrick dismounted to inspect the ground. "Tracks," he muttered, "large, fresh." Aldrich nodded. "We'll circle east." But before they could move, a sudden cry shattered the calm. One of the hounds bolted, followed by two riders. Snow exploded beneath hooves, and in the confusion, Eleanor's horse reared. She clung to the saddle, heart racing, but the animal lurched sideways, slipping on the icy slope. "Eleanor!" Aldrich shouted. She lost her grip. The world spun in white and shadow. Pain shot through her shoulder as she hit the ground, the cold biting into her lungs. The horse's hooves thundered past her, fading into the trees. When she looked up, a low growl rippled through the air. A wolf, larger than any she had ever imagined, emerged from the underbrush, its eyes gleaming gold beneath the snow. Eleanor froze. The creature's breath steamed, its body coiled to strike. She had no weapon, only a broken branch half buried nearby. Her hand closed around it just as the beast lunged. Before she could move, a blur of steel cut through the air. Aldrich stepped between them, sword drawn, his cloak whipping like smoke. The wolf snarled and lunged again, teeth catching his sleeve. He twisted, drove the blade down, and the creature fell back into the snow, wounded but alive. It vanished into the forest with a final, furious howl. Aldrich turned to her, breath sharp. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her heart still pounded wildly. No, I'm fine." He offered his hand. When their palms met, his warmth spread through her, steadier than the fire of fear. "You kept your courage," and he said softly. Most would have screamed. "I nearly did," she admitted, voice trembling. "But I thought of what you said. The wolves test what they don't understand." His gaze lingered, the faintest smile curving his lips. "And you passed their test." The horns sounded in the distance, calling them back to the hunt's end. As they rode toward the clearing, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar blooming within her. Not triumph, but quiet strength. Perhaps destiny, like courage, was found only when fear left no room to hide. In the weeks following the winter hunt, peace settled over Thornhall like snow that looked soft, but hid the weight beneath. On the surface, the castle thrived. Fires burned bright, laughter filled the hallways, and council meetings resumed. Yet beneath the warmth, something colder stirred. Eleanor sensed it first in the archives. Certain scrolls vanished from the shelves, records of council proceedings, ledgers of trade routes, and letters sealed with noble crests. When she asked the scribes, they avoided her eyes. "Orders from above," they whispered. "Best not to question." At supper, even the servants spoke in hushed tones. Rumors of unrest along the eastern border, taxes unpaid, patrols attacked, a noble's banner burned in defiance. But it was not rebellion against the crown alone that people feared. It was rebellion from within. One night, as she sorted documents by candlelight, Sir Cedric entered quietly, shutting the door behind him. "You should not stay here so late," he said. "I could say the same of you," she replied with a faint smile. His expression was grave. "There's talk in the council. They question your place here and the king's judgment." Eleanor's stomach turned. "Because I am not one of them? Because you are too close to him," he said carefully. "They say you've bewitched him with that reading of your eyes, that you've made him ignore his duties." Her fingers tightened around a parchment. "Lies have always been easier to believe than truth." Cedric hesitated, then lowered his voice. "They plan to challenge him at the next council session. Demand your removal." Eleanor felt the world tilt. "And he knows?" "I don't think so. He trusts too easily where loyalty should be questioned." "Then I will go to him." "No," Cedric said sharply. "If you do, they'll say you warned him for your own gain. Let me speak to Garrick. He's cautious but loyal." She nodded reluctantly, though her mind raced. For the first time since her arrival, she felt the sting of true danger. Not from blades or beasts, but from tongues sharpened by envy. The following morning, as she delivered documents to the council chamber, conversation stopped at her entrance. The lords regarded her as one might a serpent, beautiful, dangerous, and unwelcome. Lord Merrick, the eldest among them, sneered. "The king's scholar comes bearing wisdom, no doubt. I bring only what I was asked to prepare," she said evenly. "Indeed." His voice dripped with contempt. "One wonders what else you bring to his table." Before she could answer, Aldrich entered. The room shifted instantly to attention. His gaze swept the council, pausing briefly on Eleanor. "My lords," he said, "speak freely, as always." Lord Merrick bowed stiffly. "Your Majesty, the council grows concerned with the influence certain outsiders hold over the crown." "Outsiders?" Aldrich asked, his tone calm. Merrick gestured subtly toward Eleanor. "We serve your throne with loyalty, but loyalty cannot flourish where favoritism clouds judgment. The people question why one without title sits among us." Eleanor's pulse pounded in her ears. She expected the king's fury, but instead he smiled faintly. "Then let the people question," Aldrich said. "If truth unsettles them, perhaps their faith is too fragile." Merrick flushed. "You would risk rebellion to defend a—" "Careful," Aldrich interrupted, voice dropping to steel. "You tread close to insult against your queen's future." The room went silent. Eleanor froze, breath caught between disbelief and shock. Aldrich's eyes flicked toward her, not in promise, but in warning. "Say nothing." When the council dismissed, Garrick found her in the corridor. "They will not stop," he said quietly. "You've become their symbol of what they cannot control." Eleanor's chest ached with fear and defiance. "Then I will not let them define me by their hatred." As the wind howled outside, Thornhall's banners rippled like wounded beasts. Beneath its stone walls, whispers continued to grow, each one a thread tightening around Destiny's throat. The summons came at dawn, carried by a guard whose expression betrayed unease. Eleanor had barely risen from her bed when he spoke the words that struck like thunder. "By order of the council, you are to stand before the king and lords of Ravengard. Charges of witchcraft and deceit have been brought against you." For a moment she could not breathe. "Witchcraft?" she whispered. "That is madness. The council claims your presence has turned the king from reason," he said quietly, "that your eyes hold unnatural power." Eleanor steadied herself. "And does the king stand with them?" "I do not know, my lady," the guard murmured. "But I pray he does not." The great hall was already full when she arrived. Nobles lined the walls, their silks gleaming like cold fire. At the center stood the long table of judgment, and upon the throne sat Aldrich, his face calm, unreadable. She met his gaze for a heartbeat, searching for reassurance, but his expression gave nothing away. Lord Merrick stepped forward, voice booming. "This woman, Eleanor of Ashbourne, stands accused of sorcery, manipulation and deceit against the crown. By her hand the king's will has been corrupted, his council divided, his kingdom imperiled." Gasps rippled through the hall. Eleanor's pulse pounded. "I have done no such thing." Merrick smirked. "You deny, as all deceivers do, yet witnesses claim your eyes glowed during the hunt, that your touch healed the king's wounds as no physician could." "I merely bound them with cloth," she protested. "Lies," another lord spat. "No mere woman wins such favor without dark means." The hall roared with murmurs, the word witch hissing from tongue to tongue. Eleanor turned toward Aldrich, her voice breaking. "My king, speak for me. You saw truth in my eyes once. Was it false?" Aldrich's hands tightened on the throne. He did not answer immediately. The silence stretched until it felt like a blade pressed against her heart. Then at last he rose. "Enough," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You speak of fear as if it were proof. You claim witchcraft because your pride cannot bear to see wisdom where you expect weakness." Merrick sneered. "And yet she stands untouched by scrutiny. Let her be tested if she is so innocent. Let the fire judge her truth." A murmur of agreement followed. The trial of fire, a cruel relic of the old faith, long abandoned but never forgotten. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Aldrich's eyes flashed. "You would resurrect barbarism to justify your hatred." "It is the people's demand," Merrick said smugly. "They whisper already. If you protect her, they will say your judgment is clouded." The king's jaw tightened. "Then I will stand beside her. Let the fire judge us both." A stunned silence filled the chamber. Eleanor's heart leapt in terror. "No," she breathed. "You cannot." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw the storm behind his composure. "If I let them burn truth to ashes, I no longer deserve the crown." Guards hesitated, unsure. Aldrich descended from the dais and took a torch from the nearest brazier. Its flame danced between them, fierce and consuming. "Bring the iron," he commanded. Merrick paled. "You would defy—" "I am defiance," Aldrich thundered. "If faith must be proven by pain, then let me bear it." He held out his hand, palm open. Without hesitation, he pressed it against the burning iron. The scent of scorched flesh filled the air, and a horrified gasp spread through the hall. When he lifted his hand, the mark smoked but did not blister. "The fire has spoken," he said through gritted teeth. "If she were false, it would have devoured me." No one dared answer. The fear that once surrounded Eleanor now turned on her accusers. Aldrich turned toward her, his voice steady despite the pain. "Her eyes see truth where others see fear. Let it be known, Eleanor of Ashbourne stands innocent before the crown." The hall fell silent. In that silence, something greater than law was born, faith. After the trial, Thornhall fell into an uneasy quiet. The council's accusations had been silenced, but silence was not peace. It was a wound waiting to close. For days, Eleanor barely left her chamber. The image of Aldrich's burned hand haunted her, the sight of him standing between her and the fire like a promise she had never asked for. When Lady Rowan came to tend to him, Eleanor followed. The healer unwrapped the linen bandages, murmuring under her breath. The skin was raw, marked by red welts, but the wound was clean. Aldrich sat in silence, his jaw tight. "You were reckless," Rowan scolded gently. "A king should lead with reason, not sacrifice." "Sometimes reason is not enough," he said, his eyes lifted to Eleanor. "Sometimes faith must burn before it can shine." Eleanor felt a pull in her chest. Guilt, gratitude, something deeper she could not name. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "I would do it again," he replied simply. She turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. Outside the chamber, the wind carried the scent of thawing snow. Winter was retreating, and with it came the first signs of spring, a fragile green creeping through the frost. Days later, Eleanor found herself drawn to the courtyard garden. The ground was still hard, the branches bare, yet something compelled her to kneel beside the soil. She remembered the story Aldrich had spoken during her reading, the tree that blooms in winter, and with trembling hands, she planted a seed. Sir Cedric found her there. "You're far from the archives," he said, though his tone held more warmth than reprimand. "I needed air," she replied, brushing dirt from her palms. He crouched beside her, studying the small mound of soil. "You think it will grow?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but if it does, perhaps it will prove that even what is barren can bear life again." Cedric smiled faintly. "Perhaps you and that tree are not so different." She looked up sharply, but his expression held no mockery, only quiet respect. As the days passed, Eleanor returned to her duties. The courtiers no longer dared to speak her name with scorn, but their eyes still followed her with curiosity. She ignored them. The whispers had lost their power. One afternoon, Aldrich entered the archive while she worked. The faint scent of parchment and ink filled the air between them. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been working," she answered, not looking up. "Work is easier than facing gratitude, is it not?" She sighed. "You risked everything for me. I don't know how to live with that." "Then don't," he said softly. "Live because of it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. There was no crown, no court, only two souls standing in the quiet aftermath of fire. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You asked once why I saw something in your eyes. I can answer now. It was not destiny I read there, Eleanor, it was endurance." Her throat tightened. "Endurance is not always strength." "It is the seed of it," he said. The warmth of his words lingered long after he left. That night she returned to the courtyard. The earth had softened with the promise of spring, and beneath the moonlight she saw it, a single shoot of green breaking through the soil. Her breath caught. She knelt, fingers brushing the fragile stem. It was small, trembling against the wind, but alive. For the first time she smiled without hesitation. Renewal did not come in thunder or flame, it came quietly, in the persistence to rise again. And somewhere beyond the stone walls, the king who had risked his crown for truth felt peace settle over him, knowing that the woman once called barren had begun to bloom. The warmth of spring had just begun to soften Thornhall's harsh edges when the messenger arrived, dusty, breathless, and trembling. He bowed before the king, holding a sealed letter. Aldrich broke the wax, his eyes scanning quickly before darkening with restrained fury. "What is it?" Eleanor asked quietly, standing near the council table. "Trouble," he said, voice sharp. "A gathering of noblemen in the southern provinces. They speak of restoring the old order without my rule." Garrick stepped forward. "That is no small grumble, sire." "They're raising banners." Aldrich's gaze hardened. "Led by whom?" Garrick hesitated. "By Lady Margaret of Ashbourne." Eleanor felt her heart stop. "My mother." The chamber fell silent. Aldrich looked at her, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "It seems your mother's thirst for power did not end when she left these walls." Eleanor gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "She cannot lead an army. She has no claim." "She has your name," Garrick said grimly, "and she's using it." She tells the southern lords that you rule the king's heart, and through it, his mind. Shame and disbelief warred within her. She lies, Eleanor whispered. She always has. Aldrich's tone softened. I know. But lies spread faster than truth, and hers may burn what we've built. The council erupted in debate, some demanding retribution, others urging diplomacy. Eleanor barely heard them. The thought of her mother turning her betrayal into rebellion felt like a knife reopening an old wound. That night she stood by the window of her chamber, watching torches flicker along the ramparts. Footsteps approached, and she knew them before the door opened. I should have foreseen this, Aldrich said quietly. Hatred rarely dies. It simply changes its shape. Eleanor turned toward him. She was never satisfied. Even her guilt was pride in disguise. He studied her face, the sorrow written in the lines of her expression. You owe her nothing, Eleanor. Blood may bind, but it does not define. She hesitated. Still, it is mine. If I do nothing, others will suffer for her greed. You cannot carry the sins of others, he said firmly. She met his gaze, her voice steady. Then let me carry my own. Allow me to speak to her. Perhaps words can end what steel will not. He frowned. You would face her. She taught me how to survive deceit. Let me show her I learned more than she intended. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. You will not go alone. Cedric will ride with you, and if she so much as breathes falsehood, he will end it. Eleanor bowed her head in gratitude, though her heart twisted at the thought of seeing her mother again. When dawn came, the air smelled of rain and iron. She mounted her horse beside Cedric and Garrick, the gates creaking open to reveal a road lined with mist. The journey south was silent, each mile weighed down by dread. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the rebel camp, a sea of tents and banners fluttering beneath storm clouds. Guards stopped them, and within moments Eleanor was led to the largest tent. Lady Margaret awaited her, dressed in black and crimson. Her beauty had dimmed, but her eyes gleamed with the same cold fire Eleanor remembered. So, Margaret said, a cruel smile curving her lips, the king's little miracle returns to her roots. Eleanor's hands trembled, but her voice did not. You've gone too far, Mother. End this before it destroys you. Destroys me? Margaret laughed softly. No, my dear, it frees me. Do you think the world bows to love and mercy? Power is the only language men like your king understand. Eleanor's gaze hardened. Then you have forgotten another kind of strength, the kind that forgives. Margaret's smirk faltered for a heartbeat, then returned. Forgiveness is for the weak. Then weakness built kingdoms stronger than yours, Eleanor said quietly. For the first time her mother's eyes flickered with doubt. Outside, thunder rolled across the fields. The storm was coming, not only from the sky, but from blood that had turned against itself. The first arrows fell at dawn. Their hiss through the mist shattered the stillness of morning, striking the walls of Thornhall with deadly rhythm. Bells rang across the fortress, calling every able hand to arms. Eleanor stood by the window of the archive tower, watching smoke rise from the outer fields. Her mother's rebellion had arrived at the gates. Within the great hall, chaos reigned. Messengers rushed in and out, voices overlapping as orders were shouted and maps spread across the council table. Aldrich stood at the center, his presence cutting through the noise. Close the eastern gate, he commanded. Move the wounded to the lower quarters. No fire near the armory. When he saw Eleanor enter, his tone softened slightly. You should be below. It isn't safe here. I will not hide, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Let me help. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward the scrolls scattered on the table. Then use what you know. The archives hold the old defense records, tunnels, supplies, hidden passages. Find them. They may save lives. Eleanor hurried to obey. As she descended into the archives, the stone walls shook with the rumble of distant catapults. Dust fell from the ceiling like ash. She lit every lamp, spreading scrolls across the long wooden desk. Hours blurred into minutes as she traced the faded ink of maps drawn generations before. Sir Cedric appeared at her side, his armor streaked with mud. "The eastern wall won't hold much longer," he said. "We need another route for reinforcements." "Here," she said, pointing to a narrow corridor marked with faint script. "An old supply tunnel beneath the granary. It leads to the outer fields." Cedric squinted. "That's risky. It may have collapsed centuries ago." "Then clear it," she insisted. "It's the only chance we have to flank them." He hesitated, then grinned faintly. "You'd have made a fine strategist, my lady." "I'm only trying to keep the kingdom alive," she replied. When he left, she exhaled shakily and turned back to her work. Her mind burned with determination, but fear pressed at the edges, fear not for herself, but for Aldrich. Every echo of battle beyond the walls felt like a heartbeat, too close to ending. By nightfall, the assault had reached the inner courtyard. Eleanor emerged from the archives to find smoke filling the corridors. Soldiers stumbled past her, wounded and bleeding, their faces pale beneath the flickering torches. She caught Garrick's arm as he passed. "Where is the king?" "Still on the wall," he said grimly. "He refuses to retreat." She ran toward the ramparts, her breath catching in the smoke. Snow mixed with ash, the air thick with the stench of burning pitch. Through the haze she saw him, Aldrich sword in hand, rallying his men with a voice that rose above the chaos. When he turned, their eyes met. For an instant, the noise faded. He moved toward her, cutting through the fray. "You shouldn't be here," he said, gripping her shoulders. "Neither should you," she retorted, tears glinting in her eyes. "Let me fight beside you." He shook his head. "Your fight is not with a blade." Before she could answer, a shout rang out from the tower above. A flash of light, and then the sound of stone cracking. The wall shuddered violently. Aldrich pushed her aside as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, he lay on the ground, his arm twisted and blood seeping through his tunic. Eleanor knelt beside him, panic flooding her chest. "Aldrich, stay with me," he grimaced, forcing a smile. "Still breathing, I've faced worse." "You're hurt. Then you'll have to lead them," he whispered. "You've already been doing it." Before she could protest, Garrick's voice called from the stairwell. "They're retreating. The rebels are falling back to regroup." Relief surged through her, but it was hollow. The battle had ended for now, but the cost had only begun. Eleanor looked at Aldrich, pale yet unbroken, and realized what she feared most was not losing the castle. It was losing the man who had taught her to believe again. The castle smelled of smoke and iron. The echoes of battle still lingered through the corridors, the cries of the wounded mixing with the wind that howled through shattered windows. Thornhall had survived, but at a price. Eleanor moved quickly through the hall, skirts streaked with dust and ash. Her hands were stained from tending the injured, yet all she could think of was the king lying pale in the infirmary. Aldrich's injury had worsened overnight. Fever clung to him like a shadow. Lady Rowan looked up as Eleanor entered. "He's strong," the healer murmured, "but strength fades when the heart refuses rest." Eleanor sat beside him, her pulse trembling beneath her skin. His breathing was shallow, his face drawn tight with pain. She brushed a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "You've led battles and silenced courts," she whispered. "Don't you dare lose to this." His eyelids fluttered. "So the scholar gives orders now," he rasped weakly. Relief broke through her fear. "Only when the king forgets he's mortal." A faint smile ghosted his lips. "If I rest, will you promise not to let my council turn this victory into a funeral?" "Rest," she said softly. "I'll keep the kingdom breathing." He exhaled shakily, his hand groping for hers. When their fingers touched, she felt warmth pulse through her despite the cold air. His grip was faint but sure. "Eleanor," he murmured, "do you remember what I said, that your eyes told me a story?" "I remember," she whispered. "Then hear mine," he said. His gaze met hers, silver and clear, though dimmed by pain. "When I first saw you, I saw not weakness but a mirror. In your eyes I saw my own weariness, my doubt, my hope that something pure might still live in a world of ash. That hope kept me from becoming the monster this crown demands." Her throat tightened. "You were never a monster." He smiled faintly. No king escapes the temptation. For a long moment, they said nothing. The wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere outside, bells tolled for the fallen. Then Eleanor noticed something strange in his eyes, a reflection that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. It was as though the world itself had gathered there, a spark alive and unbroken. She leaned closer, whispering, "Your eyes. They look as they did that night in the hall. The same fire." He blinked slowly. "Then perhaps destiny does speak after all." Her breath caught. "Do you believe that now?" "I believe," he said, voice barely audible, "that destiny is not read in stars or fire. It is chosen in the moment one refuses to surrender." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Then don't surrender now, please." Aldrich's gaze softened. "You would command your king?" "I would beg my friend," she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot lose you." Silence followed. His hand trembled in hers, and for an instant she feared he would fade. But then a deeper breath shuddered through his chest. His color returned slowly like dawn bleeding into night. Rowan, watching from the doorway, whispered a prayer of thanks. "He's past the worst," she said quietly. "You've kept him tethered." When the healer left, Eleanor remained. Hours passed in stillness. She stared into the dim glow of the candles until the first hint of morning light touched the stone floor. Aldrich stirred, his voice a whisper. "Eleanor." She leaned closer. "I'm here." He opened his eyes fully. "How you were never barren," he said, his words rough but certain. "You were meant to bring life in another form, to me, to this kingdom." She felt her breath catch, her heart ache. "And you, my king, were meant to see what others refused." Their eyes met again, and for the first time she understood what the seers of Ravengard had spoken of, how truth lived not in prophecy, but in reflection. His destiny had been written in her eyes as surely as hers had been read in his. The first snow of late spring fell like a benediction upon Thornhall. Where once the air carried the scent of ash, it now held the clean, crisp promise of renewal. The war had ended. The banners of rebellion lay trampled in the mud beyond the walls. Yet within the castle, quiet reigned, not the silence of fear but of rebuilding. Eleanor walked through the courtyard garden, her cloak brushing against the frost-tipped grass. Beneath her feet, the small tree she had planted months ago stood taller now, its slender branches budding with pale blossoms. She touched one gently, her heart swelling with disbelief. "The tree that blooms in winter," she whispered. "It lives." Behind her, a familiar voice answered. "So does its planter." Aldrich approached slowly, his arm still wrapped in linen, though his stride had regained its strength. His eyes, bright against the cold light, softened as they fell upon her. "You've restored what even time had forgotten," he said quietly. "Not just the garden, but us," she smiled faintly. "You speak as if I wielded magic." "You did," he said, "the kind that mends what power destroys." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the wind sway the blossoms. The courtiers had begun to call the small tree the Queen's Bloom, though Eleanor refused the title, they whispered. Yet word had already spread through Ravengard, of the woman who had turned rebellion into rebirth, and the king who had found peace in her eyes. "Your council presses me to hold a coronation," Aldrich said after a moment. "They say the people need a symbol of stability." She turned to him, startled. "A coronation?" He nodded. "Not mine. Ours." Her breath caught. "You would make me your queen." "I would make you my equal," he said, stepping closer. "When they called you barren, they saw only what was missing. I saw what you carried: strength, compassion, truth. You have given this kingdom life beyond bloodlines." Eleanor lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. "I am not made for crowns." "Nor was I," he said softly. "But we both learned to wear what fate demanded." The words lingered between them like a vow unspoken. Later that day, as the court gathered in the great hall, the air thrummed with anticipation. Aldrich stood before his people, his voice steady, his hand resting at Eleanor's side. "Ravengard has endured fire, betrayal, and the cold weight of doubt," he declared. "Yet we rise again, not by conquest but by courage." He turned toward her, and for the first time the crown's shadow seemed to lift. "This woman," he continued, "once condemned for what she could not give, has given us all that truly matters: hope." The hall erupted in applause. Eleanor's heart ached with disbelief and gratitude as Aldrich took her hand. "Will you stand beside me?" he asked, "not as servant or symbol, but as partner, equal in heart and rule?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "If you will have me," she whispered. "I already do," he replied, voice low enough for only her to hear. When the vows were spoken and the hall echoed with celebration, Eleanor felt the weight of her past lift like snow melting under the first sun of spring. For years she had believed herself cursed, unworthy of love or destiny. Now she understood. Her barrenness had never been a void, but a vessel waiting to be filled with something far greater. That evening, as twilight fell over the courtyard, she returned to the blooming tree. Its petals glowed faintly in the dim light, pale against the dusk. She pressed her hand to its bark and smiled through her tears. "Bloom," she whispered, "not for me, but for everything we chose to become." And somewhere behind her, Aldrich's voice rose like a promise carried by the wind. "So long as you stand, Eleanor, so will Ravengard." Years passed, soft and steady as the turning of seasons. Thornhall stood renewed, its towers no longer symbols of power but of endurance. The wars had ended, trade thrived once more, and the people of Ravengard spoke of their rulers not with fear, but with reverence. Queen Eleanor walked through the courtyard one early morning, the sun stretching gold across the stone. The tree she had planted so long ago now stood tall, its branches full of pale blossoms even in the chill of early winter. Beneath it, children of the court played, their laughter echoing through the garden. For a moment, she simply watched, her heart calm. Aldrich found her there, his cloak dusted with snow. "You still come to it each dawn," he said softly. She smiled without turning. "It reminds me that hope blooms even when reason says it shouldn't." He stepped closer, his gloved hand brushing hers. "You've given this kingdom more than hope. You've given it meaning." She looked up at him, the light catching the silver in his hair. "And you've given me freedom, to be seen not for what I lack, but for what I choose to become. Then we've both learned something of destiny," he said, his tone gentle. She tilted her head. "That it cannot be read in the stars. That it's written every day," he replied, "in the choices we make for one another." Their silence stretched comfortably, filled only by the wind and the murmur of life around them. For the first time, neither of them felt the weight of crowns or expectations, only peace. Later that day, Eleanor visited the small chapel built beside the garden. Within its quiet walls lay the memory of the past, the names of those who had fallen carved into marble. She knelt before one stone more than the others, Lady Margaret of Ashbourne. The words etched into the stone shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Her mother's final act, an attempt to flee the rebellion, had ended at the river's edge, her horse collapsing under the weight of winter's current. When the news reached Thornhall, Eleanor wept not for loss but for the love that had never found its voice. Now she placed her hand over the carving and whispered, "I forgive you." The words left her lips like a release long withheld. She felt no bitterness, no triumph, only the quiet relief of closure. "You were lost," she said softly, "and I carried that loss too long. But your blood runs through me, and I'll honor it by living differently." When she rose, the air felt lighter, as though the shadows had finally lifted. That evening, the castle gathered for the Festival of Renewal, a celebration born from Eleanor's own decree, marking the first spring after the war. Lanterns glowed across the courtyard, music filled the air, and petals from the winter-blooming tree drifted through the night like snow made of light. Aldrich raised a cup, his voice carrying above the crowd. "To the Queen who taught us that strength need not roar, that destiny is not bound by birth or blood, and that even in barren soil, life can find a way." Cheers erupted, but Eleanor's eyes remained on him. When the noise faded, she spoke quietly, yet every ear heard. "This kingdom belongs not to kings or queens, but to those who believe in renewal. Let no one forget what was built here, not by power but by grace." A hush followed her words, then applause like thunder. As the night waned, she and Aldrich walked beneath the blooming branches once more. The moon hung full above them, casting silver light over the courtyard. Eleanor touched one of the blossoms, her voice tender. "You once told me destiny is chosen. And do you believe it now?" Aldrich asked. She smiled. "I believe it found me when I stopped running from it." They stood together in the quiet, their hands entwined, the scent of the blossoms filling the cold air. If Eleanor's journey touched your heart, a final whisper echoed through the story, subscribe and let her courage remind you that hope is the truest crown. And somewhere, in the soft glow of dawn, a new bloom opened, white as light, fragile as breath, and eternal as love. If this tale of renewal and destiny moved you, subscribe to follow the next story of courage and love reborn. Click the story on your screen and let your heart bloom again.